Hey, folks, welcome back to the Pulse. My name is Matt. This is Crypto Heartbeat, and it is 11 o'clock a.m. Central Texas time. And James 1, 2 through 4 says, "Consider it pure joy, friends, brothers, sisters, when facing troubles of many kinds." Boy, I'll tell you, there could not be a more appropriate theme to today's stream than this idea of how do you deal with the difficulty of life? How do you deal with the challenges that come your way? The crypto market has crashed for probably 5 to 10 odd reasons, but you know what? It is a time of despair for many people who put their hope in money. And one of the things that we attempt to do here is just to basically show you what living life with Steve Staggs is like, right? And I was so thrilled this morning. I looked at my Bible app and it said Proverbs 13:20, "He that walketh with wise men shall be wise." I'm like, I'm going to walk with Steve. I want to be wise, but a companion of fools should be destroyed. Well, that's what we're doing. Let's walk it out together. And I think that it's important to recognize that friendship is a big part of this community. And this community is so unique. Because people are willing to be transparent with each other and deal with all kinds of things. So I think, I think the theme today is going to be, how do we deal with these challenges? But first, we're going to give a shout out to a friend, but we have to have Steve on to do that. It's not Freedom Friday. It's Steven Friday. What's up, Steve?
Hey, man. How you doing, man?
I'm great. I am great. I'm great because I've chosen to be great.
There you go. There's that choice and sovereignty thing going on.
That's right. And we wanted to give a shout out to a friend. Do you want to share that?
Yeah, sure. Last week, we talked about Mike Ostell, who is a longtime participant in Crypto Heartbeat, part of your community, and is a weekly participant in this particular stream. Anyway, he as we talked about last week, he found himself under the knife, having open heart surgery. I don't think abruptly would be a misstatement.
Yeah.
Went in on Thursday. On Friday morning, he was under the knife. And last week, we mentioned about that situation with Mike. Anyway, I heard from this morning. He had a pretty tough couple of days, a lot of swelling in his feet and things of that nature. But he texted me this morning and said he's doing a whole lot better. Wants to give a shout out to everybody, in the community there. He calls them his troops. Tell all the troops I'm doing good and I love you guys, and looking forward to getting back in the swing. He said he may even be able to participate a bit today.
Wow.
So that's great news. What a difference a week will make.
That's right. Well, yeah. So, Mike, if you're out there listening and stuff, we're with you. We're bearing the burden with you. But also, one of the things I thought was cool, because I got those updates, and you got some different information than I did, but Sam Kemp was keeping me updated on how Mike was doing. And it was some of the comments that he made about just Jesus and his presence. And, it was like, a lot of the stuff that we were talking about, it's, where the rubber meets the road. I mean, you talk
Yes.
about, you know, we can talk philosophically about this, but when you're dealing with it in the moment, it's very, very real. And I was
Yes.
really encouraged by that.
Yeah. I mean, he said straight up, I know Jesus, is with me. And he wasn't talking about that or using that in the context of his text, philosophically or
Yeah.
religiously or hopefully. It was, hey man, I know he's here doing this thing, and I'm experiencing the effect of that. So this is real stuff. This isn't hocus pocus
Yeah.
stuff. This is the real deal.
Well, and that's what we're going to be talking about today is actually, I think we're actually going to point out a lot of that real stuff because a lot of real stuff is happening right now, Steve,
Yeah,
for all of us, right?
yeah,
I mean, it seems like this a season of challenges, and so we're going to talk about that. Let's say hello to some folks. Bobby Hexerod, what's up, Ricky Bobby for the win?
yeah,
Ego Foundation. There's your buddy from Cali, man.
yeah.
That's him right there. It's so great to see you. Hello, thanks for your time. Thank you for being here, man. My online ghost, busy at work today, stopping in this support. Drop a like, crypto heartbeat, and Steve, good people, like and subscribe, everyone. Thanks so much for that, my online ghost. And this is the guy, he's even in transition himself. He just dropped off his other adult child to college in Muncie, Indiana, the home of
Oh
Ball State
wow.
University. And so he's been busy with all of that stuff. And of course, this week we launched Ophir Crypto, and he's a big part of supporting the folks in the Philippines. And so it is good to see you, David Lee. Very, very good to see you. Taryn is here. Joey Torres, Magnus, Z is here. Thanks for being here, Z, and Jack Handy. Happy Friday. Happy to be here today. Good to see everyone. Great to have you here. So, Steve, what's interesting is we talk about, and it's amazing. Jesus talked in parables so much, right?
Yeah,
And how powerful those parables are. Ray and I were having this conversation earlier, and I think this is a good place to start. Is this idea of stewardship? Is that there are so many of these stories around what you gonna do? What you gonna do with what I gave you? And
yeah,
there's so many stories, and the more and more you look into the scriptures, you see this. So I want to kind of juxtapose some things and really get to some brass tacks today, and that is this idea of in the secular world, what I see right now, especially with young men, is this kind of Andrew Tate message that's out there. Okay, and it's a secular attitude of be a man, right? Be strong, be courageous, be disciplined, make your bed, right? Jordan Peterson stuff.
yeah,
And then you also see on that secular side, you see some of the mysticism stuff of manifestation and all of this. Well, what we talk about so much on this channel is we talk about the very framework of creation, right? That
yeah,
there's a way in which it's constructed. And I think that, you know, for the most part, it's not a complete mystery, right? The sun comes up, the sun goes down, and there's light and there's dark. And like I pretty much unconscious for about 8 hours a night. And there's some kind of rules to this creation. And so it's not a surprise that people would recognize that it's structured a certain way and that you can kind of get certain things by doing repetitive action. I want to talk to you and really kick this off with this idea of discipline. And we've talked about the idea of being an amateur versus being a professional when it comes to, living life with Jesus. But the more and more I look at it, the more and more I recognize the fact that he custom tailors these to fit for you because he knows all of these things and designed you. And the more and more that you engage in this relationship, the more and more you see that um, there is a responsibility that we have to act and to choose and to be disciplined. And I feel like that's the thing that's missing from all my experience with church is that we'll talk about the historic Jesus or we'll talk about the future of eschatology. But what do I do in the present? And that's what I think is we're filling that gap here. We're having conversations at least about what does it mean to steward my body? What does it mean to steward my life? What does it mean to steward the relationships I have? And then what do I do when everything goes to hell in a handbasket? Right? That's the practical nature of I got to go under the knife.
yeah.
So what are your thoughts there as it relates to all that?
Well, I mean, thanks for asking a simple question
Yeah, you're
that
welcome.
can be answered in 15 seconds with a yes or no response. But hey, that's why it's fun, right? Hey,
Yeah.
folks, this is what our conversations look like
Yep.
on a telephone. So welcome aboard. Um, well, since you've mentioned stewardship a couple of times, two or three times, and that seemed to be kind of the overarching um, element of the various questions underneath that. Um, Inside the church, stewardship is primarily about how I handle something, um, and most especially how I handle my money.
Yeah.
Stewardship is translated tithing
Hmm.
inside the church. If you're a good steward of God's resources, you're going to write your check every Sunday. Um, then you have other things that come out of that, such as I can tell you exactly what your attitude about money is by looking at your checkbook. So all kinds of things flow out of that um, very deliberate and strategic redefining of what stewardship is from the perspective of the kingdom of God. Okay, so let's first start with, all right, if we're going to talk about stewardship, then let's talk about it in the context of the right side up world. Let's not worry about what it looks like or what things may appear to be in the upside down world. That's all designed to head us in a totally different direction than what we intend,
Right.
even when our intentions are well meaning and well intended. Okay, if you operate under those rules, you're gonna end off way off course from where you think you would like to be or hope to be, which is why the definitions of the word refer to the devil as the one who causes the entire world to wander into error. You know, wandering isn't a direct path. You know, it is a meandering around, oftentimes wanting to look for what is the right way to do things, but you just little by little by little by little by little, you get off course, not because you're intending to get off course, but more importantly, because that's what the rules dictate that you will do when you follow them. Okay, so
Yep.
let's start there. So what is stewardship in the kingdom of God? Stewardship is one of the operating mechanisms, if you will, one of the systems that Jesus built in order to administer the affairs of his kingdom. And what it basically looks like is that, and this relates right back to the Elohim concept we talked about, that the Elohim are charged with the responsibility to rule with Jesus. That's what the Elohim do. Um, they they possess the authority to rule, to administer, to govern. Angelic beings, by contrast, animal beings, by contrast, they don't possess that authority. Okay, so in this system of stewardship, um, each person is given a responsibility. Let me say it a different way. Each person is given three things. Under number one, they're given a responsibility and the authority necessary to accomplish that responsibility. The second thing they're given is freedom of time and choice. The third thing they're given, which nobody ever mentions, is they're given an adversary.
Hmm.
And an adversary is there to test the heart, the attitude, the intention of the steward to determine if the steward is seeking the interests of his master, in this case, the father, or his own interests. And the adversary will use the freedom of time and choice that is given to the steward to test how the steward is actually going to utilize their authority in the accomplishment of their responsibility. Now, here's the second part of that that we're never taught inside, inside this religious world, is that we hear a lot about good and evil. We hear a lot about the good guys are bad and evil, the good guys are good and right. The only thing is, both the good guys and the bad guys view themselves as the good guys.
Yeah.
So perspective plays a huge role in that. But here is the point from the kingdom of God: evil is nothing more than the use of power to accomplish one's own personal objectives. That's all evil is the perverse utilization of power. And that perverse utilization of power is what accomplishes my agenda, not the agenda of my master, who has granted to me a stewardship and given me all that I need in order to accomplish that stewardship. By the way, if you want to look at a biblical picture of that in the context of your comment about parables, look in Luke 19, which is a sister parable to the talents parable. And so when you're given, in that particular parable, it says, there was this man of noble birth who was getting ready to depart to a faraway country to seize for himself a kingdom, and then he was going to return. And what he did is he brought his slaves to them and gave them each minas and said, go out and do business with this until I return. And where are they to do business? In the place where he comes and goes. So they were to conduct business with him, even in this context idea of him going to another place to seize. And the word is aggressively lay hold of and seize a kingdom. Well, if you start unpacking that is a profound picture of where we are in the very thing that you're talking about. In some of these challenges, there is a seizure going on. And guess what? The one who is seizing is aggressively laying hold of. The one who is being seized upon is aggressively trying to keep that from happening. And so that's the conflict. So this idea of stewardship is that as being part of the Elohim class, we are given responsibilities to perform our divine destiny in a manner consistent with and in cooperation with Jesus, the one who gave us both the life, the class, and the responsibility, and all the resources necessary to accomplish that with him. That's what stewardship is about. What we're not told, which is an important part, is that also includes being given an adversary. And so now, how do you deal with the adversary? Because the adversary is there to demonstrate and to prove what is true in us, not what we say alone, but more importantly, what is in us, both in what we say and do. And that's the adversary's role. Wow. So he has a part to play.
Well, and you think about what our challenges, and I think about mining type analogies, or actually refinement type of analogies, is this idea that in order to refine and get the dross out of, let's say you're smelting ore, well, there's a lot of things. There's sulfur, there's sulfides, there's all these things within it that are not the pure thing.
Yeah.
And you think about, well, what do you do in order to smelt and refine? Well, you add heat. And you think about the crucible as a concept of testing.
Yes.
And, the litmus test, right? All of these things that are basically, and in some cases, I think we generally recognize that there's an adversary in this world.
Yeah.
And, to think that by the very nature of you assuming this authority and having this responsibility, that in some respects, as you seek to, you say and you intend, and then you act on this responsibility that you've been given authority over, you now have, well, of course, the adversary becomes pretty obvious, right? And it's almost like, yeah, the adversary is always there, and it becomes very strong because you think about this: what is the adversary trying to do but to make you wander and to
Yes.
cause you to go off track? And what's really fascinating is what you said about evil. It's hard, I think, for a lot of us to think. We think of evil as, hot, fiery, pitchfork, red spandex devil. We don't,
Dastardly deeds.
yeah,
Yeah.
dastardly. We don't think in terms of evil being selfish ambition
Yeah.
or like I'm gonna get mine. I'm gonna get mine at all cost, and I'm not gonna consider others in addition to myself. I need this. I want this, regardless of what impact it may have on others. And that's interesting, right? Because what's so amazing about this as we talk about what we've been taught and what kind of is right side up in all of this is that it's a form of godliness, but it denies the power of it. Meaning, it's a form of the truth, but it's not the entire thing. And that deception seems to be a part of the MO of the 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 darkness. Is that literally? I don't want you to understand actually how this is created, because if you did, you would have way more confidence in following the one who designed it all.
Well,
You know?
yeah. I mean, even Paul in that area that you're describing, when he's talking to Timothy, he uses the I'm going to say the word metaphor, not that he intended it this way, but the metaphor that we would understand today of the treadmill. When he said, always learning, but never coming to the knowledge of what is true.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
that's
so
good.
there's this, we're on this treadmill, we're running like crazy, we're learning all kinds of stuff. Our intention is to come to the knowledge of the truth of what is true. We just can't get there. And the reason is because the rules of darkness won't allow you to do that. It will give you that form. It will fight you tooth and nail to keep you from coming into the substance of it. Um, and that and that's the simple nature of the conflict of evil. If you go back in and you look at, and again, we're kind of, we move back and forth between talking about the spiritual dimension and then how it affects us in the material dimension, because in the kingdom of God, these things are not separated. They're only separated in the upside down world. And I don't mean that to be some kind of weird spiritualism. I'm just talking about the very simple element of spirit and material. They are two sides of the same coin, as we describe heaven and earth. They are joined together. That's why when Jesus was asked how to pray, he said, "Hey, listen, you pray that our Father's kingdom come and His will's done. Where? On the earth. In what manner? As in heaven." These things are not separated. There's not supposed to be any daylight between them. They're supposed to function as one cohesive unit. The intention and will of my Father who created it all, out of whom everything has come. The intention is for us to participate with him in the completion of his creation,
Hmm.
which, by the way, will extend for eternity, because he is eternally creative, and
Wow.
we participate in that. So Satan, now back into the spiritual part of it, the kingdom of darkness is Satan. They are created beings that are finite by their very design. They are not infinite. They're finite. And so containment is a huge challenge for them. Yeah, they have limited resources. They are limited beings. They possess no wisdom, fabulous intelligence, but not an ounce of wisdom about them. And so their greatest challenge is, how do we contain so as to control and rule these beings who are not bound in their creative capacity? How do we do that? And so they're constantly having to deal with that challenge. And the way they deal with it is by imprisoning us without it, not only without us not knowing we're in prison, but we actually support our imprisonment. We are the very advocates of our own imprisoning, and we don't even know it. We've been trained in a system of thought that keeps us held captive. That's thus, the term that you quite often use is holding every thought captive. Well, why is there a need to hold a thought captive? Is that to incarcerate the thought? No, it's to discipline the thought that those to determine what is the source and origin of that thought. Is it from the upside down world? Is it from the right side up world? Whose interest does that thought, serve? Does it serve the interests of the upside down world or the right side up world? What does it do? And learning how to engage that kind of evaluation of thoughts and origins of thoughts at first can be pretty cumbersome because you're doing it in the mechanical consciousness of your mind as you learn for the discipline to be established in you. But eventually, it's like breathing. I mean, we use that analogy so often. Breathing has a mechanical element to it. It has process to it. When was the last time you thought about breathing?
Right now.
Hey, now that we're talking about it, but
Yeah.
the only time I really think about it is when I'm not.
That's right.
Meaning when I'm not breathing, I'm going, oh, wait a minute.
Why am I not breathing? Yeah.
Oh man, now I need to think about that. Let's re-engage the mechanical process to get it back in line the way it's supposed to.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think you're seeing a little bit about, where we're going here, that there is a reason and a high service that the adversary plays. And it's essential to us learning how to rule with Jesus, how to actually live as an Elohim man or woman, not in some weird spiritualism manner, but in the very practical, everyday world and life that we live. And once you get this concept of the adversary, man, it's life-changing in terms of how it helps you view the dynamics that are going on in the planet, from viewing it from that place seated with Christ in heavenly places that made such an impact on you in the Gen Con conference.
Well, and I think, what I'm always thinking about on these streams is the practical of how this plays itself out, right? And so we launched Ophir, 2 days ago, Ray? Is that what it was? Yeah, 2 days ago. And I told you the story. I called you and I was like, yeah, that morning I was supposed to take my son to football and the alarm didn't go off. And I woke up in a jolt and, that's how I started my day. And of course, then it seems like everything, was trying to get a wedge into us, accomplishing this planned goal of launching Ophir. And there was a lot to it. And of course, Ray had these things, I had these things, and there were so many things that all happened together. And one of the things that the practical nature of this is, I've received this very recently, this understanding. You talk about breathing. I don't know that it's as effortless as breathing for me as it may be for you, because obviously it takes practice and you see these things. But what you said is, once you see them, you can't unsee them. And that's what's happening for me, is that I'm like, hold on a second. Every one of these things I could have freaked out about.
Yes.
And in the past, I probably would have. And I think about that idea of being drawn off sides, is that I recognize this fact. If I recognize the very structure and framework of creation, right? And you have to kind of think this way, because otherwise it kind of seems hokey, right? Because what we're not suggesting is some method. What we're saying is when you understand, okay, there's a hierarchy in the right side up world, right? Here's this father, right? And we have Jesus saying to Satan himself, man does not live on bread alone, but out of every word that comes out of the mouth of God. So, and he says, I don't do anything. The Father and I are one. So I only do what he tells me to do. And then, of course, we see Peter, James, and John, and hearing a voice say, "This is my son, listen to him." Okay, so we've got this hierarchy. The one who created it all, his right, his authority of Jesus and the Father, and us as sons of God. So if you have to see yourself as an heir, as
Yeah.
adopted into the family, as someone who has been literally, you have this authority. And one of the things you said at the very beginning when we first started talking months and months and months ago was we've forgotten who we are.
Yeah.
And if you can hold this idea captive that who you are in him, and I think for those that are new to this and haven't been watching this, when we use this word Elohim, it seems so foreign. It might as well be any other word that you don't understand. But thinking in terms of, no, you are and have been given authority to rule and reign in his nature and character over this whole thing.
Yeah.
You have, in your limited space, been giving responsibilities. You have a family, all of these things, but its framework works the same. And so
Yes.
I want to illustrate this point really well. I have a stewardship responsibility over my family, and I think about what is my intent with my family, Steve? Well, the very practical, moral, non kind of religious Christian view of this is I kind of would like peace in my home. I kind of like everybody to be on the same page. I'd like everyone to be safe. I don't really want bad things to happen. I want to make sure that, people get where they need to go on time and they're fed well and kids are healthy. And, I've got this general intention that I would, lead in a way um, that is, good, right?
Yeah.
Things kind of work. Well, now when I add this layer of the right side up world and I say, hold on a second, if you created me and you said you have this authority, but only in me, right? You are the branch to my vine and that you can do nothing without me. Then, okay, so you're the source of my ability to deal with all of this stuff. And so here's my intent with my family that I see in the natural is very practical. They're right here. That's obvious to me. But what I don't realize, and I think which is a big illustration of this, is that this adversary that we don't relate to, when you start seeing that this adversary can't directly harm you. And what I mean by that is it can pick at you, and that's the term you've been using that I think is
Yeah.
so great, is that the things that actually, when things are really difficult, Steve, like Mike Ostel going, I got to go under the knife. When things are
Yeah.
really serious, it's surprising the people around me are actually really, really stable.
Yeah.
It's when the things are actually picking and misunderstandings and not actually very important that they get overblown and it tumbles into this escalation thing that gets completely blown out of proportion.
Yeah.
But here's the interesting thing. I almost feel like you talked about the test as it relates to stewardship, right? This idea that the adversary becomes really obvious is that as you seek to follow, this is a challenge to the adversary. You're listening to the one who created you, formed you. You are ordering your life in a way that says, I am coming underneath your authority, and you have given me authority over these things. If I'm correctly in alignment and I understand this role, I say, well, Jesus is alive and he speaks. All right, Lord, what do you have for me? What have I forgotten? And then you go, hold on a second. Now I'm seeing my tire being flat this morning, right? I went to 3 or 4 different places to try to pump it up. All of them were broken. These annoying things, we had challenges at home this morning. I come in, here we had somebody a big whale um in our community completely dump on Ophir without notice. And I'm thinking about like all of these attacks from all of these different locations and all of these challenges. And I stop and I go, all right, Lord, how do you see this? And you know what he says?
Mm.
What is amazing to me is he reminds me, well, no temptation has seized you except what is common to man. So if you have the ability to stand up underneath this, that in my strength, that these things are one, potential refinement of testing to see if your intention of stewardship is actually, if you're really committed to this on one hand, but on the other hand, to understand in contrast that it is minor compared to the purposes that I have called you to, and that
Yeah.
it's illustrated so much in this verse, Matthew 5:43. He wants me to get crazy upset about these little things.
Yeah.
Well, this person betrayed you. What are you going to do about that? And this person did these things to you, and you had a flat tire, and these things were a problem, and this didn't happen the way you thought it was going to happen. And I was reminded of Matthew 5:43. You've heard that it is said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. So the very characteristic and nature of being one who is a son of God, who is an Elohim man, who is one who has authority to rule and to reign in his nature and character, then we literally are impervious in him to these things, whether they be, what the world would say is betrayal or difficulties or even health related things. You say, no, I may even walk through the valley of the shadow of death,
Yeah.
and you're with me. And you think, well, what do we need right now in this time? Crypto going crazy, people not having enough resource, whatever it may be. And it's like, how do you, and this is really where I want you to like give some wisdom and insight to this, is he's clearly made those things to be minor and picking, and he will make, if you really need your attention on something, he's going to make it clear to you. A lot of people get completely overwhelmed by these things to the point where they are completely taken out of the game. How do you deal with this deep hole of depression and anxiety and difficulty and overreaction, and it almost feels like you're buried underneath it?
Yeah. Yeah. They, there's a reason they say there are no atheists in the foxhole.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
there in there's all kinds of variations of that concept. No atheists in a plane crash.
Yeah.
Thing, and I've actually been on airplanes that where people thought they were going to die. I mean, the turbulence was so severe that people were literally screaming out and praying and stuff like that. And I didn't hear a single person say, "What are you praying for? There ain't no God out there." No, they were doing the same thing.
Yep. Yep.
And the point of that is that there is something inherent in us that knows that we're involved in a game that's bigger than we are. The choice in that is, are we going to try to play that game by ourselves? Or are we going to try to learn how that game needs to be played? So and everybody gets a chance to be confronted with that choice. We talk about it with our kids, right? Things like, hey, the world doesn't revolve around you. Hey, well, why do we say that to our kids? Because our kids think that, well, first of all, their consciousness is only about themselves. So all they see is through their own perspective. And so for them, the entirety of creation is all about them. Well, as that continues, as you get older in life, they start tagging a name on it called a narcissist, and all these. And what do? You're trying to pull people out from this very narrow self-focus on things to the point where you're actually taking a step back and saying, okay, what is actually going on here? The reason why the powers of darkness pick at us is because they know that in major crisis, we bind together.
Wow, that's big.
So they pick at us because it's just an irritation to us that in, enlivens our emotions in the wrong kind of way that then can be used to inflame the environment. And it's incredibly effective. So eventually you learn, for anyone who's out there, eventually you learn how to step out of that and say, okay, either I got to figure this out all by myself, or I've got to seek professional help, or gee whiz, maybe it might just be worthwhile asking the guy who actually built it and see what he has to say about it.
Hmm.
See what's going on there. Well, man, listen, let me tell you what, son, you wanted to be in the game, you're in the game. So you think you're just going to go about this stuff and you're going to do all these things. You're going to unlock global generosity. You're going to do all of these great things for all of these people that are going to help everybody. You're going to upset the system. You're going to talk about new economic order. And you think that's going to be a cake and you're just a walk in the park?
Yeah.
Well, man, you better be concerned if it becomes a walk in the park.
Right.
Because then you're not a threat. That's that one is laying hold of to aggressively seize the kingdom. The one who is in control of the kingdom at the time is doing exactly the opposite, only he's trying to retain control. And that's the world that we enter into if you're going to live in this right side up world according to how Jesus built it. And so, whatever it is that comes against you, then instead of assigning meaning to it, my suggestion is to step back out of it and say, Jesus, how do you see this thing? Is this something I need to be concerned about? Is this something I need to pay attention to? Nah, just picking, keep going.
That we got to pause there and put a highlight on that right there. As a very, very practical thing, I recognize this in you, Steve. I was sitting at a table with you when you got the phone call that your father had passed.
Yeah.
And I saw that happen real time. I've seen you in situations where people are losing their ever loving minds. And the pause, right? My father-in-law said to me when I got married, he goes, "Hey, just one piece of advice. Major on the majors and minor on the minors."
Yeah.
And you think about that as a simple kind of dadism, and you go, you know what? Hold on a second. If I really take stock of all of the things that have escalated out of control and have caused some of the most damage in my life, it's been through picking things that have ignited and escalated into something that were not of their origin. It was really truly to create an inferno. It's almost as if the adversary has an accelerant.
Yeah.
And you give
and
it
that accelerant is us. We're the accelerant.
Yeah, and it gives you that spark happens, and it's like we react, and that is the reaction. In the reaction is the accelerant to this stuff, and we go, hold on a second. How many times have we, apologized and went, you know what? That was a straight up misunderstanding. It was not the intent, and we just let this thing get out of control, and everything piled onto it. And I just really that idea of pausing, I was thinking about Ray and I have talked about this for years. What kind of men do we want to be?
Yeah.
What kind of men do we want to be? And I remember, think about the old guy, right? It's like a grandfather guy who's got soft hands because he hasn't worked in years. And I had these men in my life, that I run into occasionally where you're a kid, you might be 10, 11, 12 years old, and things are happening around the party. And we had a grandfather in my wife's family who was like 95, and he was one of these guys. And he would just sit there on his chair, and all the kids are running around, and there are, there's like 12 great grandkids for him. And he's the kind of guy that would, if you're a 10-year-old kid, he'd go, "Hey, come here, kid. right? And he'd pull you out of this mess, right? And he'd have these soft hands and he'd pull you in and grab you and get real close to you and go, "How you doing?" And you don't realize what that means to someone who's young. Like, I really care about you.
Yeah.
How are you doing? And I see you and I recognize you and you have value to me.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about, well, what kind of person is that? Well, that's somebody who is not reactive. That's not someone who is a bull. That's not someone who is dominant. That's not someone who bullies people. That's not someone who speaks first. It's someone who listens. It's someone who is calm and at peace. And I think about this currency of God is like, what is the practical outcome of this whole journey? Well, more peace, more rest, more patience, more kindness, more love, more long suffering. And you think about that. We talked about fruit of the spirit or fruit of a tree that it produces. Is I don't think in our culture we consider that to have value.
Yeah.
But when you think of the kingdom of heaven, you're like, well, why is it that when you love your enemy, that you become sons of God?
Yeah.
Because it is counterintuitive to the way in which this system is upside down. It wants you to freak out. It
Yeah.
wants you to inflame and accelerate and burn the whole place down.
Yeah.
And I see that in relationships, especially in marriages, with people who are um, that hold contempt, that go very quickly to criticizing people's character, right? That don't have the discipline to understand. Hold on, I'm looking at someone that God created.
Yeah.
I'm going to reduce you to something that is, I'm going to criticize your very nature and character, which is biting and very, very damaging. And it's interesting because that theme of letting go and actually pausing and going, "Hey, Jesus, what do you think about this?" in its very nature is value, because you're saying, "I'm no longer am I going to react to this." And I experienced that this morning. Something happened in the family and my wife was really upset. And I said, partly because I didn't have the ability to get worked up about it. And I had to say very specifically, "I hear you and I know that this is very important to you. I'm going to help you with this problem, but I'm not going to share in the emotion of it. Not because I don't love you or don't care about it, because I know that the best thing I can do is to serve you by helping you solve this problem rather than commune with you in the emotional heat of it." And so
Yeah.
what did that do? It de-escalated the
Yeah.
situation and it provided, well, you said to bless and protect. Well, okay.
Yeah.
And you think about that, it's almost like we are bombs that have this fuse and we go, "I'm going to light this fuse." And we light this fuse and it's burning. And you're just asking people to snip it, just
Yeah.
cut it.
Yeah.
And it burns closer and closer. And you're just like, "Please snip this. I don't want to explode." And there are people who just let it explode over
Yeah.
and over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is the very essence of ruling, by the way. We've talked about, again, the Elohim. That's, I don't know any other word to put there.
Yeah.
It's the word that was originally there for those who are interested in knowing where that word came from. And it's part of the very practical expression of ruling, that when the thing is getting ready to blow up, you don't blow up with it.
Right.
You actually rule it. No, that isn't where we're going to go. That's destructive, and we're not going to participate in that.
So I just have to say this. Rule in his nature and character. Okay,
Yes.
so you've said it so many times, and I just want to emphasize this. I think of ruling, I think, Steve, sometimes as if domination,
Yep.
right? Control, hard, like hammer. I'm a hammer.
Yep.
And what you said to me, which is the nuance of this, is no, no, no. What does it mean to rule in his nature and character, not in my nature and character or
Yep.
my desires? What
Yes.
does it look like to do it in his? Can you talk about that nuance of why that is so important? Because that's to me the essence of it all.
Well, it is, which I'm really thrilled to hear, that kind of land and in a way that we can talk about it in this group is the entirety of the creation by its very definition is a form of a device one way or another. The solar system is a device. The earth is a device. Gravity is a device. These physical bodies that we operate on in this earthly dimension is a device. And every single device is neutral. It has no capacity to do anything unless and until it is animated by something that has life. Okay? So the life, the nature and character of the life will actually determine how the device is used. So if we are, so the nature and character is the inner essence and nature of the one possessing life. And it comes out through what we speak. And then what we speak, we then act on through what we do. Okay, so now think about when Jesus said about the Father, your word is truth. God is love. His word is truth. So what is that saying to us? That in truth, in the kingdom, is a character quality.
Yeah.
It's not an assembling of factual statements. It is a character quality. It is the quality that does not possess any perverse element in it. It is absolute truth. So when you rule in his nature and character, you're ruling in that nature and character that possesses no perverse element in it. It is the pure expression of love. It has no intention to do harm, but it does allow absolute liberty to choose. So when you are ruling in our nature and character, that has not yet come into the nature and character of God, not yet been developed in that way. That's the likeness element, um, in the creative story. We are taking on the nature and character of the seed of the serpent. And that nature and character is destructive. It is, it considers itself superior. It wants to subordinate and a way to enslave. It wants to dominate. It is vengeful. It is angry. It is all of those things that are destructive in their nature. In the nature and character of God, there is no destructive element. There is no intention to destroy. There is an intention to purge out what is destructive. Okay? And so learning to rule in the nature and character of Christ and the nature and character of God is that you are dealing with those elements that are contrary to the intention and purpose of God in order to render them inoperable, to purge them out, to disarm them so they no longer have effect to disrupt the nature and character of God and what he is doing. And by the way, you do that when you say, in the instance of your wife, when she's in a really, difficult emotional time, honey, I'm going to do everything I can to bless and protect you. And the way that I can do it right now is to not participate with you in that thing that is destructive to you. So if you're okay, I'm going to step outside of that and we're going to deal with this so we can restore peace to you and to our home.
Mm,
You good with that, honey? You know, so see, it's not a venge. There's no vengeance in it.
right.
You know, the entire, concept, vengeance is mine, says the Lord, that verse. Well, we hear that as him being pissed off.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, my vengeance is completely different than yours.
You know,
So
it's
let's deal with mine, not yours.
right. You know what's amazing is, I think about what's attractive to my wife, right? From a character perspective.
Yeah.
I don't have a six pack, so let's focus on character versus physical attributes here. Um, but what is acceptable? And I think, so many times the testing of things is like, what are you going to do under these circumstances?
Yeah.
And what can I expect from you? Right. And I think so many times, even if we don't, even if it's not intentional, and I think this men and women thing happens a lot. And I think because there's so many men in crypto, this is probably a helpful bit of information is that, we're not, not just called to be stoic, but in this nature of blessing and protecting and this, ordering ourselves with listening to the living Jesus, right? This idea, all right, well, how do you see this? And I've even noticed in our conversations that I can tell you're like asking him right in the moment. You're like, hey, what do you think about this? And it's like you're looking for that idea to say, Jesus, tell me how do I respond to this?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think about that as a discipline, right? This idea that hold on, well, this is kind of like holding every thought captive. Like I'm going to say, all right, I'm consulting with you. I've got
Yeah.
you in my ear,
Yeah.
and I'm consulting with you at every moment. And I think about that as it relates to my wife is you go, well, what does she want? What makes me attractive to her? Well, I think I think of a very traditional part of men is that a woman would want to, in some cases, see you not bend and break. And I don't mean artificially, putting up stiffness. What I'm talking about is this idea of how do we deal with conflict? How do we deal with these difficult things? How do we determine if they are major things? And you've said this many times. You know what? There are some times when we consult with Jesus and say, hey, Mike, you need to go in and get this heart looked at. But
Yeah.
then there are other times you say, hey, okay, how do you see this? And that idea of saying, all right, okay, I see that this is emotionally charged. And then there are times when I've been emotionally charged, like I've got diabetes and my blood sugar gets out of whack and I get weird.
Yeah.
Well, it's like, okay, hold on. How should I see this in all of these circumstances and situations? And how do we serve each other? Because if you recognize that we all have this common, adversary, and we find ourselves kind of swimming in these bullets. That's how I feel like. I feel like these bullets are just constantly being shot around. Is that how do we bless and protect each other? And it's not just a man woman thing, but it's this thing of what is community about? What does this look like? And how do we because there's so much value I feel like in expressing these things because even in the point of, I'm dealing with something really difficult, if I can just say it, it seems to lose power over me. If I can at least articulate it and get it almost out like I'm vomiting out, some poison.
Yeah.
There's something about that I think is so tremendous that we serve one another by almost allowing space for a little bit of crazy at times, not reacting to that. We almost, sometimes you have to cry. Yeah, I don't know if you've been in this situation, but it's like almost like I have no option, but crying is pretty much the only option I've got. And it's like, hold on a second. Sometimes that actually feels good to do. I think about in mourning and in all of these things. So I think that it's a very, very practical thing. And it's also I keep coming back to this. If no temptation has seized you except what is common to man, these are common to man things
Yeah.
that in the structure of things, these things are the things that you will face over and over
Yeah.
and over.
Yeah.
Are you going to be stuck in this cycle of overreacting and inflaming these things, or are you going to stop? Because Jesus is actually probably the greatest temperer of things, because it's
Oh,
almost like he's like, I literally had him say to me, I could have been really mad. I was very, very justified in being very, very
yeah.
angry. And it was a surprise to my family that I wasn't. And
Hmm.
I said to him, I'm like, Jesus just told me to stop.
Yeah.
Just stop. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna just shut up and I'm gonna stop. And you know what? And I was thinking about that. Well, that's kind of like loving your enemies. Well, anyone else would have just gone scorched earth on this deal. Well, no, I'm not reacting that way. I'm not going to be drawn off sides because I recognize that he's a shepherd out front and I recognize his name and what he is doing in this world, and his purposes are greater than any of these small picking things that I might be experiencing at this moment. And it's
Well, that's
and it's testing, which is weird. Weird.
well. It is the very nature of, and I've said it before, but it is the very nature of ruling. See, if we get sucked into reacting, then we are being ruled.
Yeah.
There's just no way of getting around it.
Are we
You
giving
know.
authority to it? Feels like I'm giving up the authority because I'm basically subjecting myself underneath this control.
Well, yes. I mean, if you really want the mechanics of how it works, because we kind of like these,
Yeah.
there is a structure, an order, a design. It, the creation functions.
Yeah.
I mean, there are just no two ways of getting around it. It functions, and it functions. We can use term well-oiled machine. Like a precisely tuned clock. I mean, this thing functions in ways you know that are just mind-blowing. I mean, planet Earth fits all the definition of a spacecraft, and this thing is whatever it's doing without crashing.
Yeah.
How is that happening? Well, there is a structure, there is a design, there's engineering, there's all kinds of things around it that enable it to function. And authority is one of those elements that has a means by which it functions. Okay, so you're in this situation, an irritation shows up, something wants to blow the thing sky high. Well, if it had the authority to blow it sky high, what would it do?
Blow it out sky high.
There you go. Now, because it's not blowing it sky high, what's it trying to do?
Get my permission to do it.
That's right. It's trying to seize control over someone or something that it does not possess control over. So what it does is from this conflict adversary perspective that we were talking about before, earlier on, is it does not possess standing. It has no authority to effect. And because it has no authority to effect, it has no power to do what it wants to do. So where must it go to get both the authority and the power to accomplish what it wants to accomplish? It has to get it from the ones that possess authority and power. Enter us. So if it wanted to blow the thing up, it would just blow it up.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it doesn't. So what it does is it picks, it irritates, it aggravates, it does all these kind of things to get us emotionally charged so that our emotions begin to take over and they begin to rule. Emotions are not designed to rule. Emotions communicate conditions that exist in the environment to alert us to what is happening in our midst. They are there to inform, they're not there to rule. That is reserved for the will. And the will, whosoever will, the will is the decision maker in us. And so what it's attempting to seize control over, it's attempting to seize control over our authority so it has access to our power so it can accomplish what it intends to do, which is to rule us.
Nothing has
So
seized you.
see? So
Yeah.
you step back and you say, okay, Jesus, how are you seeing this?
Yeah.
Just keep your mouth shut for now, Steve.
Well,
Just be still. It will burn itself out. Just leave it alone.
we have
Don't add power to it.
so many of us have been seized, right? And we go through these cycles of seizing. I got something I got to do. We haven't done this ever before, Steve, but I got to do
Okay.
it.
Okay, man.
It's inspired, man. All
Okay.
right, you ready for this one? Okay,
Sure.
this is huge. This is just everything you've been saying has been like in my mind. This picture.
Okay.
Check him. He's gone. Goodbye, Mr. Anderson.
So you see, you can't be dead. You can't be. Because I love you. You hear me? I love you. Now get up.
No.
Wow.
He is the one.
Steve. Steve. I'm gonna tell you something. Okay, like everything kind of coming together.
Yeah.
So, what is that story of the Matrix? Right, Neo. Right. Do you want to go down the rabbit hole? Yeah. Okay. He goes down the rabbit hole. Everybody's like, "You're the one." He's like, "No, I'm not the one." He goes to the Oracle. He does all these things. He's challenged with these things. He sees the nature of this duality, of this life that he's lived for so long, and the reality that it is actually this simulation. And to think that everyone's thinking he's the one except him, right? And he's been told, "Hey, you are someone in me," right? And I'm kind of tying this into what we're talking about. That moment in which he literally stands up and all of the agents lift their guns and they all shoot, and those bullets, he goes, no.
Yeah.
That's that moment for me where you say, hold on a second. You've forgotten who you are, Neo,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson. Who you are in me is not the power on your own.
Yeah.
It's who you are. And so what happens is the scene flicks to seeing the matrix in the walls. And then, of course, at the end of that, he flexes his muscles and it actually bends the very, structure of this, simulation. And you think about this idea that these bullets are these things that are being fired at us, the picking
Yeah.
things. And to think that, Neo went from, if he had known since the beginning that he could stop them, because earlier in the movie, he dodges them,
Yeah.
right? He's got this ability. I've never seen anyone move so quickly. He had he had a sense of who he was. He's like, oh yeah, this is kind of weird. Maybe they're right. No, the Oracle says it's not right. She's confused. He doesn't have this confidence in it. And obviously, I think what's amazing is, Trinity says, I love you, which there's no mystery that she is Trinity.
Yeah.
But this idea that say, hold on a second, at the core of this love is to say, who are you in me?
Yeah.
And in me, these are merely pieces of lead, or these are only, and they have no temptation to seize you except what is common to man. And so as we stand up underneath it is to say, hold on, if you can recognize who you are in this creation as a son of mine, like the prodigal son who has come back and said, oh man, if I could just be a servant. No. I financed your debauchery so that you would understand the nature and character of your father. And not in the power that you would become a ruler who dominates others, but that in the nature and character of the one who created it all, that you're actually aligned with the creation. And I think about what would it look like if there was a community of people who understood that without him, they can do nothing, but with him, they can do everything.
Yeah.
It's like,
Well, yeah, it's there's about 15, maybe 20 movies, beginning with The Usual Suspects over the next 10 or 12 years that came out in this very context, in the nature of, okay, Jesus, let's open up the modern day temple that Satan uses as his bully pulpit. And he has said this is the means by which he's going to communicate his message. Jesus, let's do that and let's communicate your message. And so for a period, like I said, of about a dozen years, there were maybe 15, 20 movies that were very much like that are parables themselves, that speak openly about how this thing works. Last week, I think we were talking about this story of Jesus coming out of his time of prayer and the disciples saying, hey, the temple complex is a great place for God to hang out, man. This place is really cool. And Jesus says, man, don't you see? Well, what happened to Neo in that situation? He finally saw what this thing was. Not that as it was presented to be, but as it actually was, in its reality. Well, we're going through that very thing right now at a national level.
yep.
We are under a silent invasion. And not only is the silent invasion happening, we are supporting it and we are giving it power and authority, and we're actually enjoying it many times. But what's happening is the invasion is happening and it's in full force and it's been going on for several years. Well, do we actually see what's going on? Do we understand what's happening? Have we stepped back and said, okay, Jesus, how are you seeing this? Because it looks to us like this thing's falling apart at the seams. Is that how you see it? What is actually going on there? You mentioned about the whale. Okay, the whale pulls out and it creates all kinds of havoc. Okay, Jesus, how are you seeing that? What's going on here? What's actually happening? Well, Matt, aren't you the one that said the best time to get involved is at the bottom? Well, how's the bottom look right about now?
Yeah.
Is it looking more bottom?
Yep.
See, well, if it's looking more bottom, what's the problem? See, it's if the bottom is the best time to get involved, then hey, let's go to the bottom.
Yep.
Let's do that. And in the meantime, we don't know what that what that person's responsibilities, needs, circumstances, issues, whatever. We don't need to. Whether they were well intended, whether they were mandatory for him or her, we don't know that. All we know is that the extraction occurred. Okay, Jesus, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, you've been talking about bottom. Here we go. Oh, oh, okay, huh. I don't like that because I really want it to go up. Well, see? So you see that little adversarial element that comes in?
Yeah.
That what it's intended to do is to distort the way you look at something so it can control what you think through what you see. No, that's not how this game is actually played. See, we are built to see both heaven and earth at the same time. We are built to see the material and the spiritual at the same time. We just don't know how to do it. It's not, I was built to be a Major League Baseball player. At 6 years old, I had no business, I could barely hold on to a bat or throw a ball. But that did not change that my skill not yet being refined did not change the fact that the inherent attributes were already there. They just needed to be refined and honed. And that's where we are.
Yeah.
And you're jumping in both feet.
Yeah. Well,
you're saying, let's do this. Wow. Let's
Well,
do it. And it's pretty powerful.
it is. And you said earlier, I thought was really amazing, is that when it's really serious, it's a galvanizing force.
Yeah.
And so remember 9/11? Wow.
Mhm.
What a galvanizing force. Now, there are, we know of the term false flag. We know of the way in which you can use, these crises to get people to move,
Yeah.
right? But we do sense when things are minor and when things are major. And of course, you think about, well, if it was just up to man, we'd be lost. And you think about, well, how do you perceive the bottom? How do you perceive towers that fall? How do you perceive wars between Russia and Ukraine? How do you perceive the threat of nuclear war? How do you perceive these UFOs or these demonic forces? How do you perceive this? And it's so powerful to think in terms of Neo standing there saying, no. And you think of that, well, what is it in us that has the ability to say no and to stop and to pause? And you think about that, well, what's the result of that pausing? Because what's so really interesting is that Jesus even came onto the scene.
Yeah.
Okay, so think about this. Prior to Jesus coming onto the scene, there were a lot of different representations of God, right? We have this temple, we have this tabernacle, we have this box, we've got these miraculous things that we put in this box, we see this power, and we see these pictures of our relationship with him. You said it the other day, you said, hey, you had to carry this ark on these wooden poles. And you had to partner. He didn't decide to make it float on its own. Like, people had to carry it.
Yep.
So I think about this idea. Hold on, was the power in the carrying? No, the power was in the ark. So this is this thing that liquefied Korah and 250 of the leaders of Israel, liquefied them. and someone literally tripped and put their hand to it and died. That partnership idea, to think that all of these things were happening, right, in these pictures of pillars of smoke and pillars of fire and provision and manna and quail and all of this stuff through the wanderings in this provision. And then to think, all right, I'm going to come and model, right? If it wasn't apparent from just looking at the heavens and how they declare my structure, I'm going to go one step further and I'm going to literally walk on this earth and I'm going to model this behavior for you. And it's really fascinating when you start thinking about that way. You like that first miracle. It's like, woman, my time has not yet come. It's like, hey, we need some more wine, dude. And what's
My
amazing,
boys are parched.
yeah, it's like, hold on a second. This idea that, well, he was reflecting to his mother that he only did that in which the Father told him to do.
Yes.
And you see this dependence upon it. You see this at the Garden of Gethsemane, right? Literally sweating blood. Is this, hey, do we have to go about it this way? No, I don't do anything except what the Father tells me to do. And so now I think of Neo, right? This illustration that we're using here of going, when you recognize where your power, from whence it comes, what is the source of the power to say no? It's inherently in you. But what's amazing is the Son of Man, who Jesus was, this representation, right? The one and only Son. An amazing picture comes into play here, is that every single one of these stories, every single one of these parables, every single one of these miracles is to say, let me show you who you are in me.
Yeah.
And I think what's so fascinating and so powerful in all of this is no one in my life until I met you would look me in the eye and say, do you know who you are in him? Not so that you may have power to lord over, not so that you may have power to judge, but so that you may have life and have it, live it to its fullness. And I go, hold on a second. So we get to do this thing aligned with the very nature and character of who you are. We get to understand its structure, model your behavior, discipline our stuff to be professionals at this. And what is the outcome of people doing that in community? Wow. And I look at this new economic order, like, let's bring it home to crypto. What does this look like? John Nash wins the Nobel Prize in 1994 for game theory. And he comes up, he just recognizes something of the creation. And what is the idea of the creation? Hey, if we consider others in addition to ourselves, we all win. Huh, that sounds like, you didn't have to win the Nobel Prize for that one. You could basically read your Bible and see that one. But how that in the secular world was such a profound idea of negotiation and contributed to this whole idea that, hold on a second, if we actually consider others in addition to ourselves and we understand who we are in alignment with the very structure and nature and character of God himself, that there is the ultimate manifestation of the kingdom of God.
Yeah.
And it seems really interesting that here we are at this pivotal moment where money is changing, and my coins in a bottle.
Yeah.
That he's using these things to say, and you said it earlier so well. You said these mechanisms are neutral, and it's like the Lord Jesus himself is saying to us, how are you going to animate this one?
Yeah.
Are you going to animate it in my nature and character for my intention, my plans of what the kingdom is supposed to look like? And then I think about, what if people actually did align themselves with the very nature and character and led and ruled and reigned in this way, considered others in addition to themselves? What would it look like? And we're getting a glimpse of it. We see that in the Hexican community. I think that's one of the reasons they're so drawn to it is, hold on a second. It's just like the founding fathers. They could have been kings. Did they do it perfectly? No. But they decided, hold on, we're going to do this differently. And then I think about Hex. What Richard Hart could have easily just rug pulled people and dominated people with the OA. But what did he say? No. in order for us to animate this and to really unlock its value, we have to do this together. And what do? We convince each other to wait on its yield. And in that is even this huge idea of the very structure of an agricultural setting in which we partner with God to break up the soil. We don't germinate the seed. We aren't the sun and we aren't the water. And it's like we partner with him for yield. And I
Yeah.
think about that as it relates to this community. Is it possible that as this quote unquote transfer is happening, that he's planting in his people through these difficulties to see that if you would order yourself in alignment with me, you are going to not overreact to stuff. You're going to consider others in addition to yourself, which is going to have blessing and protection. And the result of it is an abundant harvest.
Yeah.
And that is just mind numbing.
Well, it's one of the things that in my experience, Matt, and I pass it on to you and to the folks on this stream and others that I know, it is Jesus is a master at realigning perspective.
Yeah.
I mean, through a simple word, one word, he can totally change the way that you view something. And once that change occurs, you actually see it for what it is, and your entire demeanor towards it, your entire behavior and the way everything is totally changed the moment you see it for what it is. Well, if you are our enemy, what would your number one task be? To keep you from seeing it as it is.
Yeah.
Well, what do we call that? Darkness.
Wow.
See, so it's not all this spiritual weird stuff.
Yeah.
It is actually a dynamic of living in the everyday world. And you know what happens when you see the way things actually are? You just go about your business.
Yeah.
You just go about your business. And Mary and the company were off a day's journey off, and somebody said, "Where is Jesus?" And Mary, in a state of panic, said, "Oh my gosh, where is he? Maybe he's still back." So they haul butt back to Jerusalem. And they look here and they look there, they're frantic, and finally they find Jesus in the temple talking to the elders. And she says, "How could you do this to me?" Mom, where else would you expect me to be? Weren't you the one that who said that Gabriel spoke to you and told you who I was? The one whom you were going to bear? Where else would you think that I would be? I am about my Father. Now, the translations say being about the Father's business. That is what he said. I am about my Father. Where my Father is, that is where I am. And right now, he is here talking to these men who are astounded at the things that he was saying to them.
As a 12-year-old?
As a 12-year-old, perspective.
Yeah.
Perspective. Do you not know that that man was not made for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath was made for man? Now, if you know that, then it's not a stretch for you to see that. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. So if my Father is working on the Sabbath, guess what the priority is? I'm going to be working with my Father. By the way, don't you do that if one of your animals falls into a ditch So if you, being a man, will retrieve your animal, which is of a lower class than man, if you would do that, what would you expect our Father to do? but to go and retrieve the one who is stuck in whatever ditch he finds himself in. Perspective. Boink, boink. See? If we saw the perspective of how Jesus sees crypto and the new economic order and the role that crypto plays, if we could see that what's happening is Satan's kingdom is falling apart right before our very eyes. It is being inflamed everywhere, like what we see in a family that's having difficulty, or in a family that's being picked at, to where it's inflamed and it's begging, see, for us to ignite against each other, to blow this thing sky high. Hey, if in order to control the world, you have to control America, not the United States. You have to control America. America is the people, we, us. We are the ones that have to be controlled. Why? Because we are the only ones on the planet that are rooted in liberty. The liberty to choose. That is rulership. You must defeat the ruler before you can rule. And so America, the people, us, we have to be defeated.
Bind up a strong man.
Yep, we have to be subjected. See, we have to be subjugated. And it can't be forced on us. We have to agree to it. Thus, all the picking to get us fighting and bickering back and forth with each other about stuff that is absolutely meaningless. Well, for those who see it for what it is, just move right through it. Like the crowd that was trying to throw Jesus off the cliff, you just move right through it and continue to be about what the Father is doing in this moment in time.
Wow. It's amazing.
Perspective.
You know what's amazing about that is this, how many pictures of sight being, fixed. So I look at Paul being blinded.
Yeah.
And so many times someone was blind and now they see.
Yeah.
And of course that, thematically is such a big thing. I remember when my dad got his cataracts taken out, he's like, oh my gosh, like, so this is what I've been missing.
Yeah, right.
And if you think about that idea of perspective change, right? I would say on September 10th of 2000, I had this, like, it was a sense of weight lifted off of me to the point where I literally laughed.
Yeah.
And, I think we know that this is such a significant shift in perspective, that we use this term, and it's used a lot in scripture as well, as this idea of being saved from something. And when you use the analogy of don't you go and rescue and save your animal who's in the ditch? Well, what is that? I almost feel like, it's so clear that we're all being kind of called out of Egypt, right? And I think of this idea of what does it mean to be saved? And this alignment with, he's constantly refocusing our perspective. He's constantly removing these things from our eyes. He's constantly bringing us out of bondage. And it's amazing to see that you're right. This whole idea of bickering and picking and reacting is that within us is this accelerant, and that if we can get people to pick. And I did a stream the other day on this guy, Oliver Anthony, who wrote this song.
Oh, yeah.
You see that?
Yes,
and it is going around the world and back.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is I'm always fascinated about art and true art, not like graphic art, but like true art. And you don't see it very often, but you get a glimpse of something and it resonates. And this guy, he's a red bearded guy with his guitar, in a holler. If you listen to it carefully, it's like he's in a holler. And he's got his deer standing in the back, and it's about as authentic as you can possibly be. And you just tapped into something that is true. And I started digging in. I mean, I was like obsessed with understanding and seeing this because it had such authenticity to it. And it was so, it rang so, and I was like, why am I so emotional about some country song?
Yeah.
And then I started looking at all the reaction videos. And I follow a guy who's an economist. named Martin Armstrong, he was highlighting it. I looked at all these reaction videos.
Yeah.
All of these people, of the people that I would say the world would tell you to hate, of every race, of every religion. And it's like, how interesting that the places from which these things come are like so unlikely. And it's
Yeah.
just like Jesus, right? Nothing good can come out of Nazareth. And here's this guy in Appalachia who lives off the grid in Farmville, Virginia, becoming an anthem for this angst of a heart of freedom. And it's an amazing moment that we live in, because I think that he even recognizes this, and I recognize this, is that things have to get to a certain point or you're not going to pay attention. It's almost like you said this with the darkness. Well, what is darkness? Well, when it's really dim out, I can't really see clearly. Is that a dog or is that a person? I don't. I see something moving. So in this darkness, right, we don't have clarity. And what does he do? He shines light on it. And all of these things that we're seeing, everything from the UFO stuff to, what's happening behind the scenes in politics, it's being brought into the light. And those that are challenged by that exposure, right?
Yeah.
To me, one of the greatest exposures is the transparency of the blockchain, is this idea that, hold on a second, you mean all these things are in the light, right? If these things weren't in the light, I wouldn't have known who the whale was who dumped on us.
That's exactly right.
And you go, hold on, these things are exposed to the light. We have these communication tools. We have all of these things that, it's funny. We joked about Jesus coming on the clouds. Well, what is this cloud computing thing that enables us to do this very thing that we're doing, which gets to expose this idea that, hold on a second, you are being hoodwinked.
Yeah.
The darkness is keeping you from seeing it for what it really is. And to think that he says, I'm the light of the world.
Yeah.
How cool is that? The one who created it all, who has all authority, that says you are a son, you can stand up and say no.
Yeah.
And what does it mean when you do stand up and say no? Now you become this advocate. And even Pilate was used, and
Yeah.
even Richard Hart.
Yeah.
And whether you acknowledge it or not, he's going to accomplish what he's going to accomplish.
He's got a divine destiny, and that's going to be fulfilled. The only decision on related to that is the condition under which he's going to fulfill his divine destiny, because it's what he's made to do. I mean, it's just, I mean, I think we've said this in previous episodes, but Jesus is constantly wrecking the religious model of spirituality and how the kingdom of God works and things like that. He's constantly wrecking it, and we've talked about this once before. The first person to be that Jehovah himself identified as his Messiah was Cyrus, a heathen king. Wait a minute. The sacred name Messiah you assigned to somebody who was a heathen king? Excuse me, God. Certainly you don't understand what you've just done. Oh, is that true? What do you think my Messiah is? Well, he's the one that's your definition. That's not my definition. My definition of Messiah is the one that I empowered to accomplish the very destiny that I assigned to him before time began. Steve, you want to be a Messiah? Matt, you want to be a Messiah? You want to be one who is, I'm going to now use a religious term, you want to be anointed to accomplish the purpose? Oh, what do you think I meant when I told Paul to say that you would be conformed to the image of Christ, the Messiah, the anointed one?
Yeah.
What do you think that meant? Well, I don't know. It's just that I'm not him. Well, you can choose not to be as he is, but isn't he the one that said he's bringing many sons to glory? What do you think the nature of the glory is? It is to accomplish the divine purpose with me.
Well, and he said we would do greater things than he. Yeah, like when he was talking about going away. And that's the other thing that is this false humility that is often within the church is this idea of, well, yeah, a form of godliness and denying its power. Hold on, what does it mean to actually walk in? And that's what we see in that picture of Neo. Is
Yeah,
Neo recognizes who he is in the construct of the matrix and he goes, "Oh,
yeah,
no." And
yeah.
so that's the thing that's really interesting. You have no power apart from him.
That's exactly right. You
None.
cannot do one thing. Yep. Because you're in the matrix then.
Yeah.
And the matrix is what has power over you.
So let's take that one more step here as we kind of wrap up. Let's take it the full distance. Why?
Yeah.
Why would it matter what I choose? Why would it matter who I follow? Why would it matter what decisions I make? What would it matter, right? There's something knit in every one of us deeply that has this desire for purpose. That we know that this can't be all of it. I can't just be some random accident and that we just evolved from a monkey. Like, and just we tripped and fell into this. Hold on, there's got to be more to this because I've felt all my life that there was a reason that I actually was breathing this air and walking on this earth. And to think that you could do what you told me at the very beginning and ask him, well, what's the reason? What's the benefit of that? And we've talked about this over the last 17 episodes. This idea that it says so many times that you've received your reward in full. So hold on a second. What does that mean? If there are things that I can do on this side that you get your whole reward, then that would suggest that there's another way to do it where my reward is elsewhere. And we talked about this the other day about the 5 cities or 10 cities or this storing up your treasures in heaven. And this is where I would like to wrap things up for the last kind of 15, 20 minutes is this. It has become apparent to me that my dad died and he's not here. And I had so many plans and it was shocking and I still have trouble with it today. And so I'm faced with this mortality of this matrix, right? Of going, it's a matter of time. This thing is degrading. But I see this promise and I see this reward and I see this time and time again of store up your treasures in heaven. Well, what does that look like? They won't decay. There is something more. And we talked about stewardship and we talked about, the talents and the minas and all this kind of stuff. We see that we have been born into an area and have authority over a family or over a crypto wallet or over a business or over whatever it may be, that we have authority and we have responsibilities. The greatest possible realization out of this is this, that this is not life. And so let me explain that, and then I'd love to have your thoughts on this. It's becoming abundantly clear that real life is eternal life, and that what we're seeing dimly in this experience is not the full picture, that it is two sides of a coin, and that that's more real than this is real.
Yeah.
And that, hold on a second, this isn't just, clouds and a diaper and a harp, and that, heaven is this thing that has been depicted in culture. But then in reality, there's a refinement process that's happening here. And there is value and benefit to you saying no.
Yeah.
I only listen to the one who speaks, and I'm going to follow him alone. And it seems like every time people do that, There's reward for it. That these things aren't like, no, we're just going to torture you until you die. No, 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 no. There's actually a relationship between this experience and what is to come. And that there's actual value that is transferred across the veil, if you will, but it's also one in which these things become united as one. That the promise is of eternal life is one of reality, because when the thief is on the cross, and every funeral I ever go to, I think about this. He says to that thief, today you will be with me in paradise. Well, that doesn't sound like here. No,
Yeah.
today you will be with me in paradise.
Yeah.
Okay. So the stakes couldn't be higher, but the reward couldn't be greater.
Yeah.
So help understand, because it feels like, not that this isn't important. This is clearly important, but it seems like a staging area for real life.
Well, it is, and the real life is as present now as it is then. I mean, we think of death as a termination of something, and Jesus said, those who believe in and with me will never see death. Well, what then? How is that so? Well, because it's like taking one step into another. You mentioned about, observing me receiving the call when my dad passed.
Yep.
I've come to understand that he just took another step. And the step he took freed him from the prison of this dimension into the liberty of the next dimension that you were talking about, that's more real than this one.
Yeah.
I remember one time, somebody was talking to me about a gal who had died when she felt like God had promised that she was going to be healed, and what was going on there. Was she deceived? Was she overly hopeful? All of that stuff. And the question I asked is, well, do you think that she got the short end of the stick? Is she sitting there hanging with Jesus and say, what'd you do to me? How come you didn't heal me down there? Are you kidding? She's saying, thank you for healing me.
Right.
Thank you that I am finally whole. She wasn't begging to come back. She said, okay, man. So there's this step from here to there. So what is the purpose and to what's going on in the planet? In his genius, Jesus made the planet a disposable commodity so that it could eventually be terminated once its purpose was fulfilled. So what is the purpose here? It is to experience both good and evil. It is to experience what it is to rule. It is to experience all the dynamics that come with choice. It is to experience the reality and the power of what it is to choose. Now, why is that important? Well, to some folks, they're happy with the way things are. And so what they're going to discover is the power of their choice. Their choice is going to keep them in that which they're satisfied with. Okay, cool, enjoy. Others are going to say, hey, listen, man, I know there's more to this than what's going on here. I want to search, I want to find and discover that more. Well, guess what their choice will do? Their choice will take them on that journey until that is resolved. That's what sovereignty looks like. Okay. Now, what's fascinating is the distortions that come in along the way. We talked about it with, the whole, law of the Sabbath and how that was turned upside down and perverse. Well, what are we saying? that the authors of the religious spirit, the spiritual domain that constructs this religious construct, views an animal as more important than a man.
Yep.
Well, what were we talking about last week about giving freely to build the temple, and that we would have the same liberty and ambition and drive to build the temple called God's man? No. What did Jesus do? He saw God's man in the rut, in the ditch of whatever it was that was holding him captive. Okay? And he said, hey, let's liberate that one. See, if you're going to liberate the animal who serves you, why don't you liberate the man who is designed to rule the animal who serves you? Is that something that sounds like a good idea? Now you're starting to get the picture. In the midst of the contradictory nonsense that goes on that poses as intelligence, you get a chance to see what is actually true and real. You can choose the one option that keeps you searching for knowledge, searching for what is true, never finding it, or you get off the treadmill and say, hey, Jesus, you are the one who's true. Would you mind showing me what's actually true? Would you mind teaching me how to do the very things that you said, to live by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God? Would you actually show me what it is to have been seated in heavenly places with you, and what it looks like to look down upon the landscape of creation and actually see what you are doing and what others are doing in reaction to that? Would you teach me how to do that? Would you teach me how to be who you created me to be? Our choice will determine the outcome of our life. And for those who want to learn how to do that, the sovereignty of their choice will produce that end. And it does not matter what tries to come against it. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. That is a divine decree. If you possess ears and give yourself full measure to hear, there is no power in creation that will keep that from happening. That is rulership. That is sovereignty. That's what it looks like in the right side up world of the kingdom. It's not having, getting your way and dominating other people and, hollering and screaming and doing all kinds of stuff. No, it's exercising the choice to learn to become who we were created to be. And Matt, that's some powerful stuff, because it totally changes your perspective on how you view life and what's going on, what's happening in this country. By way of example, the system is rotting at the core and it's falling apart right in front of us, and it's begging us to inject power into it so it continue to survive. Don't do it. Let it rot. Okay? Let it go. The one thing about darkness is it has no life in it. And so when it attacks, its attack has a life cycle to it. And it will eventually burn out because it has no life. And the only thing that extends the life is when we inject our life into it. Don't do it. Just don't do it. They know, just like what you said, nope, we're not going there. We are not a part of that. That is not how we do this. We are learning how to live as God's man, both male and female. Thank you, Jesus, for teaching us how to do that. Okay? and then just live your life and
Yeah.
watch what happens. You know, it's mind blowing the change that occurs, and
Well,
you actually start seeing. Anyway,
he's continuing to build the temple.
yeah, he's building the temple.
What
What
an
resource
amazing.
would I withhold? What resource would I withhold to build the temple?
And the temple
Jesus
is
said
you
none.
and me. Yeah.
Jesus said none. When my father's working, I'm working. Let's get the boy out of the ditch.
Wow.
Let's free him up.
Well, and you think about what is what are the implications of that? You know, and that's what I hope is a good word to people who are in crypto. There's a lot of people in a lot of pain,
Yeah.
and I don't think it gets much better anytime soon, because it seems like so much, you know, at some point in time maybe we'll look at Haggai 2, which has meant so much to me in
Yeah.
my life, and it's spoken volumes to me, you know. And what does it look like when we seek him and do what he asks us to do? You said that there was a time in your life when you said, all right, I'm going to get serious about this and I'm only going to do what you tell me to do. And he said to you, you can go to the bathroom and you can listen to your wife if she
That's
has
it.
something for you to do. And you think about this idea of saying, no, you know, you've applied who he made you to be to the circumstance. And what did you do? You said, you know what? I know what being a professional looks like.
Yes.
I went from being an amateur baseball player to a professional. And what does a professional do? And I can't help but think about Paul talking about beating his body and this idea of like, oh, no, I'm going to be disciplined about this. Well, this discipline isn't a strength of the arm, although a strong arm could be useful,
Yes.
but it's one of a discipline. And I think what I'm gathering from this is, and would you share? I really want your, because I have a feeling you're going to correct me on this, which is a good indicator. The fruit of the Spirit, and it ends with self-control. And I think about the manifestations of things like goodness and faithfulness and kindness and love and gentleness, but I also see this term of this. There's two concepts that I see in Scripture: one of endurance,
Yeah.
and one of self-control. And if a tree is known by its fruit, you know, you, Steve, are producing a tremendous amount of fruit.
Mhm.
And I look at that and I say, all right, just as Jesus is modeling behavior for us, and we've got this account of it that we read, you are modeling that for me and for others. And it's like, all right, if Steve can do it, I can do it. And I
And
appreciate
there's
that.
there's the message right there. This isn't reserved for any special person. This is reserved for us.
Yeah.
This is the inheritance, if you will, that is talked about it in the scriptures. So much it's portrayed in physical things in the Old Testament, like land and possessions and things like that. But the inheritance is the fullness of his nature and character. That's the inheritance. And that is what is reserved for us. You know, that his nature and character is what gives life to everything. It gives life and meaning to everything, even the most minute. The most minute thing in life has purpose when viewed through the lens of what Jesus has designed it to accomplish. Self-control. See, we think self-control is disciplined behavior. That's what we have been taught. It could not be further from the truth. Okay. Because we don't understand what self is. See, if we understood, again, this is the matrix kind of picture to see what's actually happening inside the matrix. Inside the matrix of the Bible, is a distortion of all kinds of things in order to present something that appears to be true when it's not true at all. It's actually either an illusion or a shield to protect what is behind it. And self-control is an example of that. Okay. There would be a longer explanation perhaps in another episode, but for now, the self is the seed of the serpent that Jehovah spoke of in the garden, between that the seed of the serpent would be at enmity with the seed of the woman. Well, what is that seed of the serpent when you talk about the seed of the woman? Because we are the posterity of that seed of the woman. Well, guess what followed that seed of the woman in posterity? The seed of the serpent. Well, what is that seed of the serpent? It's called the self. That self is not the same as our person. That's not what it is. Our person is different than the self. And if you go actually into the definitions of the scriptures, we're all familiar with those couple of different passages that talk about whoever wishes to come after me, follow after me, must first deny his self. Okay. Must deny himself is how most of the translations, but it's actually deny his self. He who chooses to preserve his self will perish. And the word is actually come into the full ruin and disaster if you seek to preserve the self. But he who denies the self, okay, will come into life. Well, that word deny means to cut the source off of and reject entirely. So what are you cutting off? What is the source of the self? Well, that's the kingdom of darkness. That's the source of the self. That's the seed of the serpent. That's what seeks to mold us into the character of the serpent. So when you exercise self-control, you're exercising rulership over the self. You're cutting off its access to you. You're denying its entrance. You're saying, no, you will have no say in my life. None. That is what self-control is. It is controlling and ruling the self. The one only that you listen to and under whose authority you come is the voice and the authority of Jesus. He alone has authority to speak to me. Self, you have no authority to speak to me. That's what self-control is. And when that happens, you begin to act on and come into conformity to it, the nature and the likeness of Christ. When you listen to the self, you keep going in the direction of the character of the serpent. That's the short answer. That's self-control. It's ruling over the self.
Wow. Wow. That's
How many
that's
times?
incredible.
How many times have you heard? I knew I wasn't supposed to do that, but I did it anyway. Well, where did that come from?
The self.
That's right. So no, self, you have no say in this matter. And what actually happens is you begin to recognize that, hey, all of my life, what I call thinking is actually just dialoguing with myself. My hyphen self, SELF. I'm not dialoguing with my person, my inner person. I'm actually dialoguing with the self. And that self is connected to a kingdom, a spiritual kingdom. Okay? And through that spiritual kingdom, it becomes a microphone through which that spiritual kingdom speaks to me. Now, some people can't handle it because it sounds too flippin' weird.
Yeah.
But folks, that's the mechanics of how it works. And you don't know that until you discover it. And then you say, no, okay, self, okay, you have now been had. You've been found out. You have no voice here. Oh, so that's what it means to deny myself.
Yep.
Is to cut off the source, reject it entirely, giving it no place in my life. Oh, that kind of sounds like holding thoughts captive. No, I'm going to quit dialoguing with the self and call it thinking. I'm going to start dialoguing with Jesus and call it listening. I think I like that choice better. Let's
Yeah.
do that.
Well, it's certainly worth a shot. Try it on for size.
And practice.
Yeah. No, that's right. Well, Steve, this has been incredible, as every time is with you. I appreciate you taking the time to do this, and hopefully this is helpful to anyone who listens. And I just love the fact that we've documented this for the 17th time now. So we're going to wrap things up, folks. Thanks for joining. Some amazing people in the chat, and there's been some amazing things like Taryn. This is blowing my mind, which is so amazing. You know, Tank Crypto's here. Blue Bomb, what's up? Jack Handy. Yeah. So great to have you guys here today on this live stream with Steve. Steve, have a great weekend.
You do the same. And for those who know how to get in touch with Mike, send him a text and give him a thumbs up.
Yeah. Encourage him. All right. I'll catch you in a minute here. Thanks, Steve.
Okay. Good deal. See you, folks. Have a great weekend.
All right. There we go. Number 17. That's a lot of, that's something to chew on, boy. That's one you want to watch again and again. Last week, I felt that same way. I literally listened to it. I put it on like 1.5 or something like that, and I listened back to it. And it blew my mind again, listening to Steve and contemplating these things. So you think about what does it mean to hold thoughts captive. And, you know, when you hear so much truth and you hear so much that's, you know, sometimes feels so counterintuitive because it's juxtaposed against this upside down world. And so I just want you guys to experience what I'm experienced by spending time with Steve. And I met him at a Texan meetup in Dallas. How amazing is that? But the Lord said, listen. And what did Steve say to me? And I think this is so cool. He said, don't take my word for it. Ask him yourself. And how incredible is that? Just this idea that we have complete access, that there's no middleman. And I think about decentralized finance and the theme of all of this stuff. And so as a crypto channel, I'll wrap it up here. Knowing about Hex is different than holding T-shares. Knowing about Texan and being staked is two different things. Knowing about crypto and knowing about Bitcoin and knowing about these things is one thing. But this idea that there's an immutable contract sitting out on the blockchain and it's just sitting there. It's just inanimate. It's neutral. How are we taking all of the things in our lives, from everything from our bodies to everything, and how are we committing those things in a way? And we're saying, I'm going to animate this according to what you have designed me since the beginning of time to do. And I feel like that is incredible, because there is something happening in this world, folks, and you've got a front row seat. And I think that we see dimly the benefits of community. Well, just imagine if we all said, you know what? I'm committed to being a professional at doing what he's called me to do. And the way you become a professional is literally by asking him and following what he says. My father-in-law and I were painting a room for my daughter before she was born. And he said, hey, you know, Nanny almost died yesterday. And Nanny was his mom. And I said, oh, really? What happened? He said, well, the alarms went off in the hospital room and my sister was sitting there and Nanny said, they're calling my name. They're calling my name. They're calling my name. And he goes, isn't that kind of weird? I said, wow, that's incredible. And I've never forgot that story that he told me. And she ended up, they came in and kind of resuscitated her. I guess she had like sodium or potassium levels were really low, and they brought her back. She lived for 2 more weeks. But I've always remembered that story because they know your name and there's more than one of them. And that to me is such an encouraging thing. That just like Steve said about his own father, and I think about my dad all the time, is you take that next step into real life. So let's take this for what it is and recognize that, hey, all is not lost, right? You think that all is lost. It is not all lost. Align yourself with the very nature of how you and who you were created to be, with the structure and order, with the nature and character of the one who created you, and get ready. Buckle up. It's an adventure of a lifetime. Thanks for joining the Pulse today. Take care of yourself and do not mess with Texas. Take care, everybody.